Welcome back to NewsWire here on SportsGrid. Look who's here with us today. Pat Evans from Legal Sports Report. Pat made his way to Canada to get the very latest on sports betting update there. We will get to that. But first, Pat, welcome back to the show. And you were with us last week, so not a too big a welcome, but thanks for coming on NewsWire. Great to see you again.
No, thanks as always for having me on. And yeah, I was back last week, but it takes a little bit to digest what I learned in Canada. So we'll talk about that in a minute. And actually, we'll touch on it in this first subject too.
Yes. Well, first, let's get to this story in Pennsylvania here because, this is a topic we actually have not covered at all, which is the sports betting operators being able to take wagers over the phone. Okay, so let's kind of dive back into sports history here. Illegally, right? Illegally for many, many years. Bookies, right, so to speak, like this was, you watch the movies, okay, I'm not saying anything that nobody knows. You see them on the phone, give me this on this, give me this on that, okay, we know that's illegal. Offshores, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in the past, again, illegal, also did this. So is this legal to take bets over the phone at any place in the country? Because it would appear that in Pennsylvania it is not.
It is not, and it is still considered a proxy bet because the person is physically not in the sports book. And sure enough, the Pennsylvania sports betting regulators fined live casino early, or well, I guess it was last month now at this point, because we're now into July. That's bonkers. But they fined live casino $100,000 because a few employees took 15 bets from a bettor over the phone, totaling more than $270,000. I forget the exact amount, but that's a big chunk of change to do over the phone. I can understand how somebody might think, hey, I can go to the sports book and place a bet. Maybe I can just go ahead and call it, especially when you can actually make bets on your cell phone from an app. Maybe that is a little bit of confusion, but sure enough, it is still a proxy bet, and it came down, and they were fined. The bettor was placed on an involuntary exclusion list. The employees were fired and let go, and had their employee sports betting licenses or gaming licenses revoked. So they won't be working at casinos anymore, I don't think. Basically, to your point, it's still illegal, no matter what it might seem. Sports betting is legal, but only in certain ways. And I think this points to another thing that, we were talking about, or I was listening to a great panel up in Canada about, the main reason to regulate and legalize sports betting and online gambling is to bring things that are happening in the shadows, whether it's your corner bookie or an offshore sports book, and bring it into the light. And then you can see, what's actually happening. Without this, you wouldn't catch these people doing these things. For example, there were another 11 bettors that were placed on involuntary exclusion lists in Pennsylvania for creating accounts under different names and using different debit cards to deposit and then take it out. And so it's a type of money laundering or fraud or whatever it might be considered. And they did it with a couple $100,000 to wash that money, and that was caught because of the things that are in place now,
right,
in regulatory framework. And that is, again, that panel that I'm actually working on a story right now over at LSR about that panel, kind of the really big takeaways of why it's important to regulate a market and how important it is to have the regulated market to ensure sports integrity. And I think that's a big issue now as we see more and more athletes getting caught up in it. And people say, well, sports betting's legal, this is why it's happening. Well, no, it probably could have been happening before. We just didn't know about it.
Yeah, no, and I think that it's a very interesting topic because of the proxy betting that you mentioned. And I wonder in the future if there is some way through, video conferencing. Like I still have a feeling that you may be able to place wagers in the future, not just on an app or on a computer, but needless to say, the most secure way to do it is through that for the time being. But again, I mean, Pat, when you think about it, somebody else could take somebody else's phone, put a deposit in,
exactly,
and it's in their account.
We can't be that far. We can't be that far away from holograms, right? I mean, transporters and stuff. It can't be that far away.
Right. I mean, we got Tupac placing bets, right? Coming up next month. All right, let's get back to Canada here. You went to Alberta and came back with a lot of different stories. I know that sports betting as a possibility, just like Ontario in 2022, we could see that down the pipeline as well. Tell us more.
So yeah, I went up to the Canadian Gaming Summit, and sure enough, the big topics were 2 years of Ontario commercial market, and there was lots of patting on their own backs and talking about how great it was. We had an Entain government relations person say that Ontario is the gold standard or the platinum standard of gaming regulation. So there's a lot of just a celebratory good 2 years up there. Well, the other big topic was Alberta, because sure enough, we've heard lots and we've talked about it on here that, a law was passed to allow the market to open up. And we were kind of waiting to see what was going to happen. Well, up in Toronto, Dale Nally, the Minister of Red Tape Reduction up in Alberta, said, yep, we are going to open it up and we're going to follow the Ontario model. We're going to massage it a little bit to make it a little bit better and hopefully perform as well or better than Ontario. And that's huge because Ontario has a 15 million population. Alberta's 4.4 million. But sure enough, there were lots of panels up there kind of talking about projections. And they say, it outperforms, punches above its weight in terms of per capita betting. And so it could be as big or bigger than Ontario in terms of that. We've seen some projections from analysts in the past couple of weeks since the conference who've said, it could be $700 million in gaming revenue or $900 million. And that would put it among, the top 8 or so gambling jurisdictions in North America, which is huge for a province of that size. Does that happen? Of course, we're going to have to wait and see. It's got to get launched. I've heard quite a few people say they're trying to do it as quickly as possible. There's a chance commercial operators will be up and running by the end of the year, but I would put it more closely early next year. It's a really unique province. You've got professional sports teams, whether it's the hockey teams at Oilers and the Flames or Canadian Football League or what have you. So it's got a great kind of system. Apparently they love gambling up there. They're going to try to tie casinos into it, unlike Ontario, kind of maybe a model like here in Michigan or New Jersey where the skins are tied to the casinos. But they're really hopeful and a lot of people seem really bullish on its potential.
All right. While we end with some college sports and college football, as we know, Pat, coming down the pipeline here real soon, next month, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
Most of the states that have sports betting legalized in the country are moving away and pushing back on college sports, college props. I shouldn't say college sports. You're still always going to be able to bet on games, but these props. New Jersey simply trying to get those on the menu at this point. What's the latest there?
Yeah, so a bill was amended to include in-state college betting, which is not allowed in New Jersey at this moment. So if you wanted to bet on Rutgers, the Rutgers-Michigan State game, you can't because it's illegal. Yes, to your point, college prop betting is kind of moving away. We've got people talking about how the athlete, mental health and just health overall needs to not have that because of, heckling and threats and whatnot. But if you don't have the option to bet on an in-state college, I imagine a lot of Rutgers alum live in New Jersey still, or St. Peter's or whoever. You're going to try to find somewhere else if you're that keen on betting. So kind of to the point of bringing it into the light that we were talking about at the top of the hit, same sort of thing. You should have the option to do it. Otherwise, they're just going to go elsewhere.
Yeah. All right, Pat, great stuff as always. Thanks for coming on the show. You and I will talk next week. Thanks for coming on NewsWire. Happy 4th of July to you as well.
Yeah. Have a great weekend, Craig.